I'm Dr. Will Austin, and this is UAS 109 Crew Resource Management course lecture on workload management. So let's talk a little bit about the concept. It's not really that big a novel concept, but it's one we should be considering when we're considering what we're going to do with crew resource management. So what do we mean by workload management? So in CRM, we always want to be emphasizing workload management. When you're managing the crew, you're not just managing personalities, or you're not training for situational awareness. You're also assigning tasks and managing their workload. So workload management allows you to ensure distraction management at the same time. So by distraction, I don't mean an emergency or contingency situation in flight. When I'm talking about distraction, you know what it is. It's you get a group of people together. Some of what we do, especially in unmanned aircraft systems, is going back, doing our checklists, finding a problem or an issue before takeoff, and it allows for a lot of downtime often. Or when we're up in the air, we're in the middle of a mission, but we're in basic hover kind of position because we're capturing pictures or videos of a specific thing for the client. It allows, or it creates that situation of complacency where we see people are distracted, and they're not distracted by the operations, they're distracted by one another. So what can we use to help in our workload management? Well, the number one thing is checklists. This is why we use checklists. Checklists are there. They give us that paper or electronic video version of digital version of steps we need to go through to ensure safety, to ensure risk mitigation. And we do these checklists to create within ourselves this repetition. So it becomes normal standard operating procedures for us. But we have to also remember the timing of the implementation of these checklists can be beneficial if timed correctly, or a distraction if timed incorrectly. So let's talk again a little bit more about workload management. What are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to prioritize tasks for each crew member that increase situational awareness. It increases their ability to know what's going on in the operation during the mission. So that's what the tasks are supposed to do. It's not just a completion list. It should be managed by time, by quantity of tasks, by effectiveness or efficiency of your crew. So we need to do that. You need to prioritize the actions of your task, distribute the work in a way that makes sense, logical sense. It may be fairness, but it could also be based on pilot ability or crew member ability. Okay, and what you're trying to do here, and this is kind of important to remember, is you're trying to manage for the unexpected. You're trying to manage for any contingency, any incident, any emergency procedures that you might take. So that's what we're doing here when we prioritize action and distribute work. Now, up to each crew member, and this is one of the things when you have a crew you want to make sure they're doing, is it's their job to improve or ensure their proficiency as a UAS pilot, but also their currency and knowledge in the UAS industry. So when we talk about this notion of currency and if you just look up the straight definition of currency and proficiency, they're going to be very similar. So let's try to differentiate what we mean in aviation and in the UAS industry. And once again, we're going to take ideas from manned operations and then modify them to apply them to our unmanned operations here. So for the manned aircraft pilot, they have currency requirements that are different than the unmanned or the remote pilot. So they may consist of a flight review within the preceding 24 months, 3 takeoff and landings within the preceding 90 days, and especially when carrying passengers. A flight review is conducted by a certified flight instructor, and this includes at least 1 hour of ground review and 1 hour of flying. Then the certified flight instructor determines if you pass the review and endorses in your pilot logbook. If you failed to pass the review, then you would need to be retrained or require retraining. So there's a pretty standard operating procedure in manned aviation. In unmanned aviation, we see some differences. So let's talk about what that is, because it's nowhere near as well developed as manned aviation currency requirements. And I suppose, as new as it is, who knows? I mean, we know, but I mean, it was nowhere near the level of standard operating procedures when manned aviation began, and that's where we are with UAS operations. So if you're going to operate your unmanned aircraft system under the civil rules or CFR Part 107, there is a recency requirement. So you have to retake your pencil and paper test every 24 months. So you take your first Part 107, which if you're in this course, chances are you already have passed. And then 2 years later, you have to take your recurrency test, which is usually about half. I think they drop most of the weather, if my recollection from when the last I took it remains intact. But for the most part, you're going to get your airspace, you're going to get your UAS operations, you're going to get any change in regulations, and you're going to be retested every 24 months. However, there's no flying here still. And your knowledge is evaluated by retaking basically a multiple choice test. So, we can argue for some time, is that proficient? Is that current? Well, that is the definition of currency in UAS pilot operations. But I'm going to talk to you here in this video about how we at Warren want to train you to step up your UAS currency and proficiency to another level, so that when you're working for someone or you're running a crew, we want your proficiency and your currency to be at the highest levels. And we want to find ways to modify our training so it's more like manned operations and it's more diligent and much more comprehensive. So let's talk about your currency. And then when we talk about this, we're going to talk about your personal currency as a UAS pilot or as a remote pilot in command. So you need to consider this a top priority for your operations. The best pilots are the ones who work on and consistently upgrade their skills, their knowledge, their proficiency, and their currency. So an example might be if you were to start a UAS operation, or things that we do with our faculty here is we want to see at least 3 takeoff and landings every 90 days for each drone or each unmanned aircraft system that you're authorized to take out of the lab, work with students, work with on your projects, etc. So if you're trained on the Phantom and you've taken off, that would help your personal currency, but that would only be for the Phantom. So if you were looking at the Parrot Disco, or you were looking at the Wing True 1 or the EBX, then your currency, if you haven't done takeoffs and landings, programmed, worked these things out, it's still only for the Phantom. So we have to remember all these different operating systems, and even sometimes within the same manufacturer, have different applications that we're going to use for flight operations. So keep this in mind, that when you have takeoff and landings, it should be for each drone. And if you set this up for a business you're working for, keep that in mind as well. Being current and proficient in one unmanned aircraft system certainly does not make you current and proficient in every unmanned aircraft system out there. Your personal currency requirements are unique to each person and based on your operating environment. So, when we're in Northwest New Jersey, we have to have proficiency in currency in things, different weather patterns than maybe we would have in Arizona. So think about your operating environment. Think about the missions that we do. Our missions are educationally based, which means we're going to train you across a broad spectrum, from cell tower inspections to flight operations to agriculture to search and rescue. So a lot of different operating environments. So we're trying to prepare you for the future. But when you go into business, you might be doing something over and over and over and over again. So it becomes repetitive. So your currency can grow at that level. Your personal currency requirements should also align with current industry information and best practices. So what we do a couple things at Warren. One is AUVSI top is what we're working towards, so that we have can get you additional certifications that say something to business and industry. But another great thing you should be looking into, and you can Google this, is just the WINGS program from the FAA Safety Team Pilot Proficiency Program. And a lot of this, if not almost the vast majority, is really going to be about manned operations. But remember, they're going to go over things like aeronautical decision making here and updating you in that. They're going to go over some things in crew resource management, the weather, all these things that your currency would diminish if you were just to follow the CFR Part 107, CFR 14 Part 107 regulation requirements. So we want you to advance beyond that. We want you to think of yourself in a lot of ways. I want you to think of yourself as a manager, as a pilot, but as an aviator. I want you to think of yourself as a professional. I want you to think of yourself as someone who can plan various missions. We want you to be able to do things in Pix4D and photogrammetry in GIS so that you have a broad base of knowledge and comprehension of many different topics in the UAS industry. But in order to maintain your proficiency, remember, the thing you're going to fall back on is you're the remote pilot in command, and who's responsible? You are. So keep your currency up. Consider reading industry publications, such as those from the Association of Unmanned Vehicles International, or AUVSI. There are other ones out there. If you're in the law enforcement, there's police proficiency, law enforcement proficiency. If you're in fire, they have training programs and periodicals as well. So whatever industry you end up in, keep current in what's going on. You're in a beginnings of an industry here in unmanned systems that is at its beginning stages. So you're going to need, even after you finish the degree or you finish a course, you're going to need to continue to read because things are going to change. They're going to improve, and training and knowledge is going to become even better. And let's face it, where are we going to end up with package delivery? We're talking about real levels of autonomy in robotic operations there. So we're not, the knowledge in the systems aren't even built yet in some of these things that where we have the vision for what UAS could do. So staying up on this is going to be really important. And then, of course, another exceptional method to maintain your personal currency is by going to industry conferences or shows, or, there are a lot of them out there. You have AUVSI Exponential, you have AUVSI, they do them on automated systems. You have the FAA and AUVSI have an annual conference. You got Interdrone. There are a myriad of them. There are small educational opportunities, smaller conferences, larger conferences. So look regionally so that you can do things. And if one of the large conferences comes close to you, then you can take advantage of it as well. And I understand if you're starting a small business or something, these conferences can be a little expensive at the outset. So there are usually ways to get access to some of the information through webinars and etc. after the conference for a much more cost-effective rate. But keep that in mind as well for yourself. In addition to currency, we have this notion of proficiency, which is relatively similar. So let's try to say currency is about getting the knowledge, getting the skills, knowing your abilities. Proficiency is about application. Let's think of it that way. Applying the knowledge, your skills, your abilities for safe, efficient, and effective mission accomplishment. All right. So proficiency is also the repeated ability for a task to be performed to a certain standard. So a standard operating procedure, as we talk about a lot in this class. But what is that task, and what is that standard you would set for your crew? Would you test them before they go out to make sure they're proficient? Okay, so if I was hiring a crew, I might want to see some flight operations from them. I might want to see and ask some basic questions beyond Part 107 to see if they're current and they're proficient. In UAS, the remote pilot in command may need to set the standards. And at Warren, we have worked a long time with a number of universities, mainly Embry-Riddle, and we're working through AUVSI TOP, and we're training at that level. So whether when you come out of here, whether we certify you or another top training provider can certify you, we expect you to be able to fly at those standards at level 2 or level 3, depending on the industry you want to go in. And that's an important part of what we're trying to train you towards, not only our degree, but also industry certifications. When we're talking about proficiency or your pilot proficiency, consider the common missions when you're figuring out what should be your proficiency requirement. And your experience in a lot of ways is here at the college where it's broad. We have multiple instructors. We have a number of different proficiencies, all kinds of different missions because we're trying to prepare you for the workforce. But when you get there, you may find that you're dealing with a common set of one mission type or maybe 5 mission types that you're consistently doing. So there is a way to say, okay, what is the standard of proficiency we would want to see from a crew member before we allow them on the team? Figure out all the missions you'll need to perform and then determine what are those common flying tasks that are required to support them, and then practice. Practice, practice, practice. It is easy to become less than proficient in UAS operations when you're unable to practice. So again, we have the issue of weather in some of our regions around the United States where UAS operations may be all but suspended for a time period due to weather considerations. So that's when you want to use flight simulators or other ways to just keep your fingers on those sticks as much as possible to keep your proficiency and your flying levels up. Determine how many iterations over what period of time would be necessary for the average UAS pilot on your crew to competently perform. So this is where you're going to set your standard. So maybe you say, okay, this flying pattern, we're going to practice orbits because we're doing cell tower. So I want you to be able to do 10 orbits within a confined space consistently, and that might be my standard for that. I might have an ascension, descension for the same that I need you to fly up, orbit, come back, fly down. So, and you would want to practice this not at a tower, but at some other kind of staging area. You know, at the college, we have NIST and AUVSI kind of apparatus permanently set up. That might not make sense for wherever you are. You might use a tree, or you might use a flagpole, or something else you can get close to. Be careful where you're practicing. You don't want to practice around live wires. If you're doing inspections of wire inspection, your practice should always be in a place where there is less risk, not more risk, because remember, you're practicing to improve your performance. So in 2010, September, October 2010, in the FAA safety briefing, Practice Makes Proficient, Parson kind of started her article with this, and then the article goes on to explain this, which I'll do now. But I think it's a really good way of looking at it. If we go back to the 2008 book, Outliers, The Story of Success, and we think about what Malcolm Gladwell said there. He basically said that really, for someone to be proficient or for someone to become expert at something, there's a 10,000 hour rule. So based on a study by Florida State, by Anders Ericsson, this rule holds that success, or I'm going to call it expertise, in an activity is based not on your talent. And listen, we have a lot of people that in our classes that come through, and they played a lot of video games up to that point, and they seem really proficient at first, but without practice in a live situation, that could be detrimental. So at first they may seem like they have more talent or more ability, but remember, those people who play video games get used to hitting the reset button a lot. The reset button doesn't work in real life the same way it works in a video game or in a simulated environment. So let's keep that in mind. So it's not that you have the talent, but it's the practice, lots of it. So if you do the math, for instance, 10,000 hours of practice would equate to about 20 hours of practice per week for 10 years. All right, let's think about that. You wouldn't be an expert for 10 years if you practiced 20 hours a week. All right, that's a lot of time. In a 40-hour work week, probably no employer is going to pay you to practice 20 hours a week. So when we think about this and we say, "Oh, I'm a remote pilot in command. I have a piece of plastic from the FAA." So what? Do you have 10,000 hours? And even when we talk about AUVSI certifications, we're talking about hundreds of hours, not tens of thousands of hours. So keep this in mind. Even our best expert pilot at the college, probably with the age of UAS, has not reached 10,000 hours at this point. So that's about becoming proficient and current. Now let's talk about the workload. Let's assume you have proficient, current, all of them in the UAS operations on your crew. They've managed, they've practiced, they've gained the knowledge, they're in great shape, you got a great team, but you still, as the crew resource manager or the remote pilot in command or the air boss or whatever position you're holding at the top of the kind of the organization, there's still things you might do that will cause poor workload management. Let's talk about them. A major cause of these incidents result from poor workload management and or in a failure to plan and rehearse mission flights. So that lack of practice, coupled with you haven't figured out how to assign tasks and prioritize them and standardize them, is what's going to cause you an issue where you end up with a pilot out there that might be on your crew or on your team that you're hired to manage who's doing something foolish. All right. So what can we do? What are some of those causes? If you're in charge of your crew and you're unable to recognize that you've given someone an excessive workload, that can be a cause of poor workload management. If you realize there's an excessive workload and you fail to respond or reassign, that can cause problems and incidents. So let's talk about this for a second. Yeah, you might say, oh, and we do this a lot in management. We call, there's an old saying, if you want something done well, ask a busy person. And this is an old saying in leadership and management in a general sense. And we don't want that to go into aviation operations. We don't want you to say, this is my best person. So I'm going to load them up because I can count on them 100% of the time. And I have this other person over here, and they're just not that strong. And it's not they're not strong because they're new, because you're always going to have that. It's that they're not strong because they don't practice, because they don't take the industry seriously. They don't take their education seriously. They don't have a commitment to currency. They don't have a commitment to proficiency. So you give them less tasks. All right, I need the person, I need the visual observer, but I'll keep them pretty, and I'm going to load up this other person. That's going to cause you problems in the end. You need to redirect, retrain, or rehire a new crew member. All right. Another problem is that person who you've given less to do. Let's go back to that old saying. You want something done right, you want something done well, ask a busy person. That comes from low workload complacency. That comes from the fact that I don't have much to do. I wasn't assigned much. So blah, blah, blah. They become the distraction. They're not part of the team. They're part of the problem at this point. And an inability to manage periods of low workload is what that diminished workload priorities. So, wow, let me try to say that again in English. Your issue here is if you don't realize that every UAS operation has a period of low workload, and if you don't address that or give other supplemental tasks during that to keep everybody busy, you may diminish workload priorities. Now, and your examples, I want you to think about this, but even when we're out flying, or you're out flying with other instructors or myself, think about it. We have this a lot. It's artificial because we're educating. So I may need, or the instructor may need to go off with one member of the team and kind of instruct them, which puts everybody else in a lull and a downtime. Don't make that your normal practice when you go out in the business and industry. You want to ensure that you are keeping people busy during these low workload periods, okay? Because that's going to help them. It's going to keep their mind alert. It's going to keep them fresh. And it's going to diminish complacency. So let's talk about workloads. So what is a method of workload management? Okay, here's 8 steps you can kind of take, all right? And you can kind of constantly be thinking about. Set mission priorities. Always remember safety. What's the priority of the mission? Then create a series of checklists. Look, these don't have to be elaborate, but give everybody a checklist of and that'll allow you to see, okay, what are the tasks that each crew member is going to do? Okay, and you may not write all these out at first. If you're a small 3-man operation or something, you may have cocktail napkin checklist, but as much as you can standardize. And this is what you should be doing when you're not flying missions for your employer. You should be creating these checklists, these priorities, and helping them set a standard within their organization that is your legacy when you leave. Okay, and everybody leaves every operation or every company at some point, especially as you go out and start your career. So don't get upset about that. Leave the knowledge behind, leave good practices behind, leave a legacy. All right, but don't create the checklists that are so micromanaged that they actually cause complacency. Be careful with that. Make sure your crew talks and interacts. Make sure people are willing to ask for assistance. Make sure that there's communication, and we've gone over that in this course before, and that's important. We don't want to diminish that as well. Situational awareness. Make sure that they can ignore distractions from these priorities. So if there's something distracting them from the mission priorities, you as crew resource manager may need to step in there. And you remember, you're going to manage people of different generations, different genders, different cultural, ethnic, racial backgrounds, different ways of seeing things. So one of the things I like to say is aviation is not a democratic operation. Okay, there's strict command, and I think that helps keep us safe. There are strict mitigations. Explain this beforehand so that when you're dealing with a crew member who may, people they're people. So like, you're picking on me, I can't even have a conversation. It's not that you can't have a conversation at a time when we're not flying, when everything's safe, when you don't have a priority or a task to do. But right now, we are literally putting a flying computer in the sky that isn't always 100%, we can't count on it 100%. It's not as reliable as we may like. So, we need to be paying attention to that. We're in a fledgling industry. You have a lot of public that's like, I don't know about this. So professionalism, professionalism, professionalism. And instill that in your crew, but also take the time to explain to them why this is important. Not everybody will have gone and gotten a college degree and understood this at the level you do. Some people may have just passed their 107, and you may be the trainer at this point, which is why that's part of this course. Delay your non-essential tasks, all right? If something isn't important or as important, put it to a later point, all right? The worst thing that can happen is, we had an accident because Sally was working on this task priority list, but that was something we could have done when we weren't flying. That was something for the post debrief. So think about this and do definitely delay non-essential tasks. Delegate, and I've talked about this a lot through this video, but make sure when you're delegating that you're doing it fairly, that you're also delegating, or number 8, assigning the critical tasks based on currency and proficiency. So if you're out there and you're like, well, I've overloaded crew member number 3, and the other crew members don't have as much because I can't count on them because they don't have currency and proficiency, let me ask this basic question and then I'll answer it. So it's not exactly rhetorical. I want you to think for a second. What should you be doing then? You should be training them and increasing their currency and their proficiency. And if they refuse to do that, then you need to get another crew member. So you need a lot of crew members with great currency and great proficiency. All right, we're coming to the end of this session. It's not quite as long as some of the others, so let's do a couple quiz questions. What 3 elements are involved in workload management? What 3 things that I say at the very beginning of the video were most important? Distributing the workload, all right? So making sure that it's fair, it's equitable, it makes logical sense, it's set on standard procedures, but also that you take currency and proficiency into account when you're deciding who gets what workload. Don't take likability. Don't make it about that. Make it about professionalism. Make it about knowledge. Make it about skills. Make it about ability. And make it about that person who practices the most. Prepare for the unexpected. That's number 2. Basically you're doing all this for the worst case scenario. for what you don't expect to have happen. Okay, anybody can go out and run perfect missions every time. But you know this. If you're in this course at this point, you've been out there enough times with us to know if something can go wrong, it will, otherwise known as Murphy's Law. And set your priorities. Then set your procedures, your policies, everything else we've kind of talked about in the myriad of videos that we have in this course. Prioritizing duties and responsibilities while working in unmanned aircraft system operations is an example of what? Blank and blank. What are we trying to do? When we prioritize duties and responsibilities while working, that's when we're doing workload management. Okay? That's what it is. As blank increases, blank blank decreases. As something increases, workload, then situational awareness decreases. Has to. Okay? And we have numerous examples from aviation history where the checklist became the distractor, and they diminished situation instead of increasing it. So that's your job. Your job is to figure out, and you're going to look at yourself, but then you're going to look at your crew and say, okay, have I overburdened in workload? Is it too much? Are there too many checklists? Am I checking off too many things? Now I have this person repetitively going through the steps, but are they losing kind of their consciousness almost and their situational awareness because I've overburdened them with these things? So there's a balance here, and it's an important balance for you to work through. From a UAS crew resource management perspective, workload refers to what? So from our perspective in the UAS operations, and in a lot of ways in manned aircraft, the same thing, workload is going to refer to what? It's going to refer to the number of tasks and duties that a given crew can effectively handle during a mission. Let's think back to some of the other things I talked about a little bit. It's going to vary by individual. It's going to vary by operating mission. So your crew, so you might have a 4-person crew that can handle a mission, and another crew that might have their proficiency, their currency, their experience might be different. They may have only 3 people and they can do the mission better than you. So you want to educate up to their level of ability. So it's not a cut and dry. Okay, I have this mission. I'm gonna do a cell tower. I'm within X amount of miles from an airport. I have FAA authorization. So now here's the standard number of crew members. Okay. You'll notice at the college, what do I always do? Well, one of the nice things about having so many Part 107 pilots after the first semester is we can have more crew than we need. So we often do. So there's duplicative kind of task and priorities there. But in the real world, that's not going to be the case. So again, remember, you're in a learning environment here. When you're in a real world environment, it's always a little bit different. So I want to just express that to you right now. I'm Dr. Will Austin. This has been Workload Management for CRM UAS 109 course, Warren Community College. We'll see you in the next video.